Greetings. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 5, which is looking at symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism, as it's defined here, the ongoing use of language and gestures in anticipation of how the other will react, a conversation. So some of the main points to think of there are first, ongoing use. So this is something that is continuous, that functions for a long period of time or an elongated period of time. And it's also language and gestures. So basically what they're getting at is verbal and nonverbal. And finally, there's intention behind it because you're anticipating that someone is going to react in a particular way. So you've got to understand that in this particular theory, intention is an important aspect. Just a little bit about Mead. He was a disciple of Herbert Blumer and coined the term symbolic interactionism. The main things we're going to be talking about here are meaning, language, and thinking or thought and how those interact. So we're going to start off first with meaning. And this is a really important concept to understand. Humans act towards people or things on the basis of the meanings they assign to those people or things. So if you see me as teacher, if you understand me as teacher, you're going to act towards me in a particular way versus if you just see me as random person, you're going to act towards me in a different way. So it's our interpretation that counts. It's how do we interpret what's happening, not what we mean, but how do we interpret? And the difference there is when you say, so for example, you're in an argument and someone says, well, you said this, and well, I didn't mean that. According to social construction, the fact that you didn't mean that doesn't matter. It's the interpretation. It's how people understand you. So you have a stimulus, something happens, an interpretation. So you think, oh, this means this, and then a response. So meaning comes from social interactions that people have with each other. How you know something depends on how you name it. So random person, you're not going to pay much attention. You're not going to know me. Teacher, you're going to get to know me at least a little bit because your grade is dependent on knowing what I want and doing things that I need you to do. If I am close friend and you name me as such, then that knowing is going to be even deeper. So symbolic interactionism is the way we learn to interpret the world. How do we understand who people are, what things are, and how we should react to them? And here's another great example. If you have a plate, a nice dinner in front of you, and that's a steak, you might say, "Yay, great! I'm going to eat it." Right? You're interpreting that as it's food, it's good food, it's something that you really want. But if you find out that is the steak of a horse and not a cow, all of a sudden you might interpret it completely differently. Just because of how we understand horses versus how we understand cows. So symbols can be nonverbal, they can be words, they can be how we talk about things or how we act towards them. So how we interpret things is based on how we think about them, right? So thinking, the way that they're talking about thinking, it's an inner conversation, right? It's something that you're having. Think about minding. Minding is a term you're going to want to know, and that's an inner dialogue that you use when you're thinking about what's going to happen in a conversation. So if you imagine that you have to have a tough conversation with someone, you might sit there and think about, okay, if I say this, then they're going to say this, and then this will happen. That's all minding, right? That's minding. You have that inner dialogue where you're rehearsing things before they actually happen. So according to Mead, humans have a very unique capacity. They have the capacity to take the role of the other, where you think about how someone else is viewing you. So this is really important because a lot of students screw this up. Taking the role of the other is not how other people see you, it's how you think other people see you. Because you can never know how another person sees you, but you can think about how you think someone else is seeing you. That's taking the role of the other. Within that taking the role of the other comes one of Mead's most important things that he has talked about, and that is the looking glass self. It's how we see ourselves as a result of taking the role of the other. So it's not just how we see ourselves, it's how we see ourselves once we think about seeing ourselves in another person's shoes, right? Meaning, language, thought, interconnected. You cannot have one without the other. And who we are, how we understand ourselves, is a function of language. We cannot understand who we are without talking about how we are, who others are, and through looking at others, therefore defining who we are. The Mead-Cooley hypothesis: individual self-conceptions result from assimilating judgments of significant others. In other ways, how we see ourselves is a combination of how people who are important to us see us, or how we think they see us. So there are two parts to the looking glass self. First is the me. This is the objective self, the image of the self seen when one takes the role of the other. So when you think about how other people see you, that's the me, right? Your ideas of how other people see you, okay? The me is viewed as an object, the image seen in the looking glass. So again, if you're looking at a mirror, a looking glass, that thing you see in the mirror, that is the objective self. That's the me, okay? The I, on the other hand, is the inside, spontaneous, driving force, everything new, unpredictable, unorganized. That's the I. So the I is kind of what we want. If you had no worries in the world, didn't have to worry about what anyone thought, that's the I. The me is how you see other people, or how you think you see other people viewing you. So how does that all relate to society? So society consists of individuals who make their own choices, right? You have individual people, or actors as Mead calls them, who make their own choices. And because they make their own choices, society is always in the making. It's always remaking itself. It's always changing. It's not society as we design it. It's society as we make it on an individual basis. And the generalized other is this broad people, this idea of just people. So if you look in the mirror and you say, oh, people are going to think that I look like crap today, right? Who are those people? Well, it's just people. That's the generalized other. So that generalized other, how we see others, that shapes how we think, how we interact in the community, because we're always seeing ourselves from the perspective of how other people see us. That me is organized society within each of us. It's always this societal presence inside of us. So Mead thought that theory was only valuable to the extent that it was useful, right? Which makes a lot of sense. That this theory creates reality. It has, I like this pun, meaningful research. It's both meaningful and full of meaning. And the way that you can research this is through participant observation. So through ethnography, like we were talking about in the first couple of chapters. So adopting the stance of the interested visitor who notes what's going on in the world, right? And that world that you are looking at is the world of the generalized other through the eyes of this community. We talked about it earlier, but naming. Naming is an important aspect. how we name something or understand it. And I don't mean name like, give your kid a name or your dog a name, although that's part of it. But naming as to what is this thing or who is this person and how do they function in my world, that kind of naming. Self-fulfilling prophecy, that we have responses that confirm what we think is going to happen. A great example of this is like on a test. If you sit there and say, oh, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail over and over and over again, even as you're studying, then it is much more likely that you actually will fail. That's the self-fulfilling prophecy. It confirms what you already anticipated, that you're going to fail. Also talks about symbol manipulation, how we can manipulate symbols to mean multiple things. So we might name a particular symbol with various things. So let's get into Levinas here. Levinas says that our I forms how we respond to others. So he takes kind of an ethical perspective. So when he says, I am my brother's keeper, from biblical language, right? Each person is kind of ethical to all humanity, to actively care for people. That is his argument, that's how our I forms, is how we do that. What is our ethical response to humans as a whole? Now, if that's the case, according to Arnett, then interpersonal communication is more about listening than telling, because our concern is more with the other, right? And understanding the other and being the reflector or the keeper of all of mankind. So that would mean that listening is more important than telling our own story. So what are some critiques for symbolic interactionism? Well, one is, if you're looking at theory as testable explanations of observable, sociable regularities, that doesn't work, right? There's nothing that you can do that's testable about understanding people's meanings and their own images of themselves and how others see them. Mead's work is interpretive, right? So you've got to look at the 6 criteria. So you can't say, oh, well, this is flawed because it's not testable. Well, it's not meant to be testable in a specific scientific way, so you have to look at those 6 criteria of the interpretive to really look at it. Another critique is the boundaries are, everything's vague, right? There's lots of what ifs, and it doesn't allow itself to come together in a neat package. I think Mead's response to that would be, when have you ever seen a human being in a neat package? He would argue that that's how people are. They have fluid boundaries. They understand concepts vaguely. They have undisciplined approaches that don't lend themselves to an elegant summary. I mean, that's who people are. So that would be his argument to that. So make sure that you take the quiz for this chapter. And if you want, after class, after we go over this in class, another quiz will open up for extra credit if you want to see if your understandings have improved. So we'll see you in class.